As soon as we all said aloud amen, everybody dove into their food like there was no tomorrow. Mrs. Oldman and Bertha kept running back into the kitchen to bring out more tomatoes or succotash, while Jackie poured sweet tea and Gus shooed cats away. Wishbone sat by Cotton, hoping he'd drop a chicken leg. By the time Bertha brought out dessert, everybody was rubbing their stomachs and saying how they couldn't possibly eat another bite, except, well, maybe just a little of that peach cobbler. Cotton leaned across the table to grab a brownie and said, "Hey, look, the wishbone." Sure enough, right there on that greasy platter was the chicken wishbone. Of course, my dog Wishbone heard his name and ran over to Cotton, probably thinking that he was about to give him something good to eat. "Who wants to pull the wishbone with me?" Cotton said. Dwight jumped up. "Me, me," he said. "No, no, no," I hollered, pushing Dwight out of the way. "It has to be me." Cotton held the bone behind his back while Dwight tried to grab it. "I called it first, Charlie," Dwight said. I stomped my foot. "No, it's mine." I could feel anger flooding over me, and it was all I could do to keep myself from shoving Dwight. Then Howard hurried over and whispered, "Pineapple," in my ear just as I was stamping my feet again. Jackie shook my shoulder and snapped, "Good grief, Charlie, quit making such a fuss over a silly old bone." But Howard piped up and said, "Come on, Dwight, let Charlie pull that wishbone." Was Howard going to tell everybody about me making a wish every day? I hadn't told him not to tell anybody, and now I bet he was, and everybody was going to think I was crazy. But he didn't. He told Dwight that he'd give me some of his Bible bucks if he'd let me pull the wishbone with Cotton. "How many?" Dwight asked. "3. Make it 5. Okay." So Dwight ran off to grab another brownie, and Cotton held the wishbone out to me.
No.
We each took a side and closed our eyes. I made a wish, and then I pulled. Snap! That bone broke in two, and guess what? I got the big side. The side that's supposed to make your wish come true. "Dang it," Cotton said, tossing his piece of the bone onto the table. Before I had a chance to thank Howard for helping me like that, Mr. Oldman announced that it was time for them to go, and they piled back into Burl's truck. I knew I should have joined Jackie and helped Bertha clean up the kitchen, but instead I sat out in my yard with my arm around Wishbone and watched that truck bounce up the gravel driveway, loaded with all those good-hearted Oldmans. When they turned onto the road, I hollered, "Thank you!" I figured Howard probably wouldn't hear me, but then I saw him give me a thumbs up before the truck disappeared from sight. On Jackie's last day in Colby, she and Bertha sat together at the sewing machine in my room and talked about boys and clothes and movie stars while they worked on a zipper. I took Wishbone out into the yard and pulled weeds from between the marigolds beside the garden shed while he slept in the sun. I hated thinking about Jackie getting on that bus to Rowley, going back to her happy life, painting her fingernails with Carol Lee, dating Scooter, the paintball champion, maybe even going to beauty school. Each yank of the weed was like a jab in my heart as I thought about her leaving me behind. By the time Jackie and Bertha finished that zipper, there wasn't a single weed left in that yard, and my heart ached so bad I wanted to cry. Later that day, me and Jackie and Wishbone went down to the Oldmans so Jackie could say goodbye. The boys sat on the porch steps looking like they were going to a funeral. "Y'all better come visit me in Rowley," Jackie said. She threw her arms out wide. "Everybody, we'll have us the best time ever." They nodded solemnly and Cotton swiped at tears. "If I'm still working at that old Waffle House, y'all come by and I'll throw on a couple of chocolate chip waffles for free." Cotton perked up. "Chocolate chip waffles?" Jackie nodded. "Yup, and I'll make sure they put on extra chips on yours, okay?" He grinned. "I bet Charlie's gonna miss you," Howard said. Jackie put her arms around my shoulder. "Well, I'm gonna miss her too, but she can come visit anytime." "Visit?" I said. I'll be going back there to live. I rubbed my hand down Wishbone's back. You know, when Mama gets her feet on the ground, I added. Jackie looked down at her lap. Wishbone's tail swished back and forth in the dry red dirt. Well then, Jackie said, I reckon it's time for me to get my hugs in. She held her arms out. Each one of those boys gave her a quick, awkward hug. Then Mrs. Oldman ran out of the house and said, It was just a joy and a blessing having you here in Colby, Jackie. Then she and Jackie hugged and we headed back home. That night, Bertha made a special supper of meatloaf and llama beans, fried green tomatoes, and sweet potato pie. Wishbone laid beside my chair waiting for somebody to toss him a piece of meatloaf every now and then. I have to admit that we're spoiled him rotten, and he's turned into a world-class beggar. After we sat out on the porch for a while, me and Jackie went back to my room. I brushed Wishbone while Jackie packed, stuffing her shorts and things into her duffel bag, and telling me again how lucky I was to have such a nice place to live. I watched her gather her nail polish and toss it into the duffel bag, and I started to feel more pitiful by the minute. Wasn't going to happen to me, I wanted to ask her, but I didn't. After we turned the lights out, I stared up at the ceiling, watching the shadows of the dogwood tree dance in the moonlight. Then I took a deep breath and said, Can I go back to Rowley with you? The silence that followed nearly swallowed me up. I could feel my heart beat in my chest and Wishbone's warm breath against my cheek. Then Jackie got out of bed and sat beside my sleeping bag. Nothing's gonna change, Charlie, she said. I used to think it would, but now I don't. Scrappy is gonna keep being Scrappy, and Mama's gonna keep being Mama. And you and I are on our own. No magic wand is gonna fix things. I didn't want to believe that, so I pushed those words away, so I wouldn't have to think about them. Then I said, Did you know Mama left us when we were little? Just ran off with a garbage full of clothes to start a new life? Jackie heaved a big sigh. Yes, I did know that. How'd you know? When you're 7 years old and your mama waltzes out the door without so much as a goodbye, well, that's something you don't really forget. Well, how come you never told me? I said. She put her hand on my back and rubbed in little circles. 'Cause I didn't want you to hate Mama, she said. Do you hate Mama? Nah. She pushed her hair behind my ear. I don't like her very much, but I don't hate her. But why can't I live with you? I asked, so quiet it was almost a whisper. Jackie hugged her knees. Charlie, I can't live with Carol Lee forever. I'm saving my money and me and Waylon Jarvis are getting an apartment together. I can't take care of you like Gus and Bertha can. She said, Shoot, I can barely take care of myself. We sat in silence for a minute. Then Jackie said, You got a good life here, Charlie. You got Gus and Bertha loving you and treating you like a princess. You got all those Oldmans thanking the good Lord for you. Then there's Howard, the nicest friend you could ever want. You got those beautiful mountains and a garden and a porch to sit on that's like sitting on the side of heaven. Wishbone kicked his legs and let out a little woof like he was having a doggy dream. Jackie rubbed his stomach. And a dog that loves you like nobody's business. I looked at Wishbone and thought about Bertha saying how dogs love you no matter what, and my heart nearly burst. Don't hate me, Charlie, Jackie said. Hate her? I loved everything about her. I loved the old Jackie and the new Jackie. Why couldn't I tell her that? I guess I hadn't had much practicing saying I love you. So I just sat there in the darkness with Wishbone, twitching in his sleep beside me, and said, I do like those blue streaks in your hair. What do we got for time?
10:42.
Should I stop? Probably.
Yeah. Is that it, the chapter?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's getting very-
All right, I'm going to stop for the day, but goodbye, everybody.